Dia, you can start now.
Okay. Wait 1 second. Let me take.
Just a second, guys. Before that, I'll repeat the motion for the finals of Lions. The motion is that this house believes that social isolation is a modern epidemic that requires urgent attention. That this house believes that social isolation is a modern epidemic that requires urgent attention. L001 is the opposition team, and L002 is the proposition team. Is the speaker one of the proposition team ready?
Yes, yes. Can you give me a countdown?
In three, two, one.
Hello, everyone. I'm Aditya Raut speaking for the motion that this house believes social isolation is a modern epidemic that requires urgent attention. What is social isolation? Social isolation is a lack of social connection which can lead to loneliness in people. What is modern epidemic? An epidemic is defined by being contained in a small population, but the number of cases is larger than normally expected. We as a proposition team take a stance that social isolation is a modern epidemic that requires urgent attention. Now my first argument is health impacts due to social isolation. Social isolation has been linked to various physical and mental health issues, including depression, anxiety, increased stress level, and reduced immune function. Due to the loss of jobs during COVID-19, people felt disconnected with their existing friend group, as they all had been employed except them, making people go in depression, anxiety, and made them feel lonely. 43% of people feel loneliness on a regular basis. 45% increased risk of mortality who report feeling lonely. Loneliness is a more dangerous cause than obesity and as damaging to health as smoking 15 cigarettes in a day. And we as the provision team give you an solution that social isolation should be addressed. Addressing social isolation can contribute to overall well-being and improved health. My second argument is loneliness and isolation. In the digital age, individuals may be more connected to technology, but face-to-face social interactions have decreased. This leads to feelings of loneliness and isolation, which can negatively impact individuals' quality of life. Urgent attention is required to foster real human connection and reduce the loneliness epidemic. And I would like to give you a personal example. A friend of mine was socially isolated during the COVID-19 times. He didn't have any friends. And due to which he went in depression, he went in anxiety, and also had suicidal thoughts during some days. And due to this, what happened? The lack of addressing of social isolation made him go into depression. And my following speakers will speak on the motion will elaborate on the motion while speaking increased alcohol and substance use, poorer physical health, increased risk of depression, a higher risk for suicide, changes in brain function, antisocial behavior, heart disease, higher stress level. And my third speaker will summarize the case and conclude our side of the motion while giving one argument: social isolation is everywhere. And we as the proposition team say that this motion must stand, and we believe that social isolation is a modern epidemic that requires urgent attention, and we will address it. We will address social isolation, and my following speaker will give a solution of how social isolation will be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Aditya. The first speaker from the proposition has a minute to prepare.
How much did I speak for?
You spoke for 3 minutes, 30 seconds. Can we have the first speaker from the opposition?
Yes. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Can you give me a countdown?
Sure. In 3, 2, 1.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, the first speaker from the opposition team will be presenting my distinctive arguments opposing the motion that this House believes that social isolation is a modern epidemic that requires urgent attention. We, as the opposition, would clearly have the stance that social isolation, which the terms we define social isolation, is a lack of social connections. A lack of social connections, social isolation can lead to loneliness in some people, while others can feel lonely without being socially isolated without and can be coped up naturally. I repeat, that can be coped up naturally. Now, epidemic. Now, what is epidemic? Epidemic refers to an increase, often sudden, in the number of cases of an infectious disease above, which is normally expected in a given population in a specific area. Examples of major epidemics include cholera, diarrheal diseases. Comparing this to social isolation are polar opposites. Social isolation can be necessary in some situations, such as during a pandemic, to help slow down the spread of infectious diseases, as done during the COVID times. When people are socially isolated, they are less likely to come into contact with others who may be carrying the virus, which can help reduce the overall number of cases. Social isolation can also be necessary in some situations, such as when someone is at risk of harming themselves or others. Here there is no question of situating it with an epidemic. My second speaker will state how social isolation is not at all a bad thing. This might have sparks of benefits and thereby not to be associated with an epidemic. Social isolation is not an epidemic but a need. I repeat, social isolation is not an epidemic but a need because of the growing unnecessary toxicity in today's world. People need to detoxify themselves and relax. Social isolation has no link with suicide, as mentioned by the first speaker from the proposition team. Social isolation has no link with suicide, no fact, no research at all. The prop is making vague comments. Thank you. I would like to rest my case here.
Thank you, Bhumi. The second speaker from the proposition has a minute to prepare.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Ajis, is he audible?
I think his video is cutting out beach beach.
It is clear for me. Is it clear for other Ajis?
Yeah, it's clear.
Yeah, I can hear him.
Your voice just cracked.
Am I audible now?
Yes, you're audible, Aryan.
Okay. I'll give myself a countdown and then I'll start.
In 3, 2, 1.
Increased alcohol and substance use, poorer physical health, increased risk for depression, a higher risk for suicide, changes in brain function, antisocial behavior, heart disease, higher stress levels. And I'd love to hear the second speaker from the opposition saying why social isolation is not a bad thing after my speech. All of these reasons, do you not feel like something so vague and something so harmful can cause an epidemic? As if this is not an alarming issue. That is exactly what social isolation is, dear speakers. Hello, everyone. I, Aryan Dani from the proposition, am going to speak. I'm going to propose the motion that this House believes that social isolation is a modern epidemic that requires urgent attention, and I highly speak for. The effect of social isolation in loneliness and mortality is comparable to that of a well-established risk factor, so much that it can be compared to a natural calamity. It leads to smoking, obesity, and physical inactivity. Social isolation is an epidemic because it affects a large number of people. First speaker also defined epidemic. So, physical and mental further. Which leads me to my argument number one. Social isolation and loneliness are widespread, with some countries reporting that up to 1 in 3 older people feel lonely every day. A large body of research shows us that social isolation and loneliness have a serious impact on older people's physical and mental health, making them cause less longevity and dying faster. Which leads me to my argument number two. Social isolation harms the social fabric of communities and societies. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated the problem of social isolation. Social isolation has been found to be associated with poor mental health. This includes risk for depression, anxiety, and cognitive decline, substance use. One of the reasons that living in isolation is difficult is basically rooted in our human evolution. A thing so fragile and so obvious is definitely going to lead a pandemic that needs serious attention. Therefore, social isolation is a public health issue. Which leads me to my argument number three, facts and effects on humans. Given our current pandemic, perhaps looking back to the SARS pandemic, during that time, psychological effects of quarantine on persons in Toronto that 28.9% and 31.2% of respondents respectively, no longer durations of quarantine were associated with increased prevalence. Social isolation has also been found to have only negative physical effects on humans. One study notes that feeling isolated and lonely is associated to accelerating aging of the brain and cardiovascular diseases. However, this is not how is this not an alarming modern pandemic, dear opposition? Which is bringing me to my argument number four, facts. In 2003, a heat wave in Europe caused a significant number of deaths, particularly among socially isolated early individuals. The heat affected various countries and led to thousands of fatalities, and only affected significantly to the people who were socially isolated. A meta-analysis published in the journal Perspectives of Psychology and Science in 2015 examined the relationship between social isolation, loneliness, and mortality, found it to be 29% increased when they are combined. Another study published in journal Heart in 2022 analyzed data from over 48,000 participants and found that social isolation and loneliness are associated with a higher risk of developing and dying from coronary heart diseases. How is this not an epidemic that we need to see through? Social isolation significantly increased a person's risk of premature death, a risk that rivals those of smoking, obesity, and physical, I already stated. Social isolation was associated with 50% increase in dementia, poor relationships, increased risk of heart disease, increased risk of strokes, loneliness, death, emergence, hospitalization, compulsion, and emergency departments were increased. There are two high-risk groups who are young people with low-income communities and poor people experiencing bullying. These are the two big in our country, social isolation, and this is going to an alarming rate. And that is why this is an epidemic. Thank you, and the motion must stand.
Thank you, Aryan. The second speaker from the opposition has a minute to prepare. Can we have the second speaker, please?
Yes. May I start?
Sure. In 3, 2, 1.
You can't know yourself more better than socially isolating. Good afternoon, dear educators and my worthy opponents. I, the second last speaker from the opposition team, and I totally stand against the motion that states that this House believes that social isolation is a modern epidemic that requires urgent attention. Now, I believe whenever a person is sad, or if he or she is feeling low, the person would only ask for a bit of lonely time to understand everything and to calm himself. And who doesn't like their personal space? I believe that isolating yourself is just asking for some personal space. And personal space is a significant importance as it plays a crucial role in maintaining our emotional well-being and fostering healthy relationships with others. Now, I would like to state some really important points, which is psychological well-being states that it allows individuals to have a sense of privacy, solitude, and control over their surroundings. It provides an opportunity to self-reflection, relaxation, and rejuvenation, which are essential for maintaining your good mental health. Second, the boundaries. It helps establish boundaries between individuals, indicating a level of respect. I repeat, respect for each other's physical and emotional boundaries. Respecting personal space promotes healthier interaction and reduces the likelihood of conflicts or misunderstandings. Now, autonomy and individuality refers to that it allows an individual to express their unique identities, interests, and preferences. By preferences, I mean that a person, if a person is introvert, he or she likes to be being isolated from others. It gives them the freedom to pursue personal hobbies, engage in self-care, or simply have some downtime without feeling obligated to be constantly available to others. It reduces our stress. By this, I mean that it can be means of reducing stress and anxiety. It provides a retreat from external demands and pressures, allowing individual to recharge and regain a sense of balance. The fifth and the last, relationship dynamics. It is really important in a relationship to be whether it be a romantic one, familiar one, or friendship one, allowing each other to have their time fosters trust, understanding, and emotional intimacy. It recognizes the need for independence and avoids feeling of suffocation and being overwhelmed. Remember, isolation requirements may vary from person to person, so it's crucial to communicate and respect each other's boundaries to maintain healthy and fulfilled relationships. Now, alone time increases empathy. When you spend time with a certain circle of friends or your co-workers, you develop a we versus them mentality. Spending time alone helps you develop more compassion for people who may not fit into your inner circle. It increases your it sparks your creativity. Being alone can help you build your mental strength. It may reduce your behavior problems, and also being alone gives you an opportunity to plan your life, to imagine what you can do in your further life. Now, let me focus on the word epidemic. Epidemic by definition and all means is when it is so widespread that its cure is negligible, like HIV and influenza. But when social isolation, which can benefit in the situations I mentioned, has a simple cure that my third speaker will elaborate about. It is not a modern epidemic and does not require urgent attention. Thank you. Here I would like to rest my case.
Thank you, Aditi. The third speaker from the proposition has a minute to prepare. Can we have the speaker, please?
When I reach 3 minutes, can you please write it on the chat box instead of showing up the fingers?
Sure, I'll do that.
Will you give me the thumbnail or should I give my own?
Sure, I'll give you one in 3, 2, 1.
Loneliness and social isolation. Two different poles of two different magnets sticking to each other at every turn. These two go hand in hand. Where one is present, so is the other. Social isolation, as described by my first speaker, is a lack of social connection. A lack that can be contributed by anything: loss of a loved one, separation from friends and family, disability. All big words, but it can even be something as simple as taking a leave from school because you are sick, or your friends making plans in front of you without inviting you. I would like to focus on some rebuttals. Speaker one, you have completely ignored our arguments and the definition given by my first speaker of social isolation, who defined it as a lack of interpersonal relationships. Your argument is purely subjective because, dear speaker, I believe you are not qualified to be making assumptions on how loneliness affects different people. Speaker one, you also mentioned that loneliness is something that should be coped up with naturally. But then why do people go to therapy? Why do they spend a huge amount of money on their mental health? You should also know that people suffering from social isolation are less likely to get the help they need because of the thinking that you have presented in this argument today. In 2021, approximately 74.21% of individuals suffering from mental health issues did not seek help. Dear speaker, I also like to encourage you to open your ears, as we have again and again provided factual evidence. Speaker one, you said that there are no statistics of suicide due to social isolation, but in a study by Princeton University psychology department, 44.81% of people who commit suicide due to loneliness have chalked it up to social isolation. Speaker two, please be aware of the fact that loneliness and personal space are two different things. The former is extreme and forced, whereas the latter is healthy and relaxing. Please check what something means before basing your entire argument on it. You have treated loneliness and you have treated isolation as something to be taken lightly. It's like saying that even though you can't see the actual adverse effects of it, you should take anything lightly. You also define introverts. But dear speaker, what does different types of people in a social setting have to do with this motion? Speaker two, you also said that HIV and influenza. You also mentioned HIV and influenza, but I would like you to fact check because they are no longer an epidemic. And I would also like to mention that my first and second speaker have already given an abundant amount of evidence about the adverse effects of social isolation and isolation on physical and mental health. So how can the proposition sit here and still deny the fact that this is an actual epidemic that requires urgent attention, that needs urgent care? Social isolation makes people question their self-worth, their importance, and like the plague, it has left no stone unturned of affecting people of all ages, of all genders, and whatnot. Which is why I, as the proposition, believe that the motion must stand, and that yes, people suffering from social isolation also deserve to be treated like they have an actual mental health issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Diva. The third speaker from the opposition has a minute to prepare.
Yeah, I'll take my minute.
Can you tell me how much time I spoke for?
You spoke for 3 minutes, 35 seconds. Can we have the speaker, please?
Can you please give me a countdown?
Sure. In 3, 2, 1.
I must comprehend the confidence of the proposition team, treating social isolation as such an important epidemic, whereas a simple solution is talking to your loved ones, is texting to them, and it has been provided, a solution has been provided by National Health of Institute. They have provided a solution. Still treating it as an urgent epidemic is so baseless. Because we as the opposition are on the stance that social isolation is not always a bad thing. And secondly, when it has a simple solution, why treat it as a big thing, as an epidemic? I'm Aryendra Jha from the opposition side, and I want all of you to focus on my argument number 1, where I'll be stating it as social isolation is a mirror. It is a symbolic representation that it is not an epidemic and it does not need an urgent attention. Reasons you may ask: social isolation, to solve it, individuals need their own time to cope up with it. Imagine if we just consider it as an urgency, the people who are actually coping up, it will be so preposterous for all of them. Secondly, social isolation, as rightfully stated by my second speaker, in most of the cases is actually beneficial. The toxicity that we have in today's environment, one solution is to socially isolate yourself and be away from it. If we make it an epidemic, that solution will also fade away. Thirdly, social isolation that the proposition over here fails to understand can have multiple reasons for it. But if you situate it with an epidemic, then every single thing would sound like, then every single problem will be on the accounts of social isolation. Giving an example, bullying, staying away from family, these are reasons for many things. But if we consider it an epidemic, everyone will be scared, dear speakers. Now, before I move on to my next argument, let's focus on the really important rebuttals. Speaker 1 of the proposition team talked about depression and anxiety. Again, our point, it is subjective to a person to cope up from it. If you consider it as an epidemic, if you consider it as an emergency, more panic will happen. What about that? The speaker did not give one reason why to make it urgency. So over here, we clearly see what fault is there. Secondly, the second speaker of the proposition team confidently talked about alcoholics and smoking, but completely forgot there is rehabilitation for all of them. A cure is there. Whereas in epidemic, I would like to state, cures are nil. I want to repeat, cures are nil. When you have something which has a simple solution, when you have simple doorways, why again consider it and situate it with epidemic? The third speaker of the proposition team confidently stated that my first speaker is treating loneliness as a joke. Clearly, no. We stated that social isolation and loneliness in that part by example is something we should not ignore, and it is a good thing. The proposition till now have so many vague arguments, like if I have fear for cockroach and I'm scared of it, and many people have, then I guess we should consider it as a modern epidemic because many people are having it. No, dear speaker, that is now how it works. And this brings me to my argument number 2, exemplary effect. As I stated, we live in a toxic environment, whereas people actually choose to socially isolate to get a solution. Example being, a physics scholar teacher known as MR Sir had so many memes made on him. He himself stated to avoid from the toxicity, he used social isolation. Thirdly, an example which was there, a person failed in 12th standard and NEET, Sashank, he became so socially isolated. But after a week, when he talked to his family, he talked to his loved ones, the problem was cured. And this brings me to my important point that when epidemics are there, solutions are almost nil. I would like to also fact check the third speaker of the proposition team that HIV and influenza are an epidemic and have a solution almost nil. This brings me to my argument number 3, the conclusion. Social isolation and considering it as an epidemic and urgency is like fire and water, completely cannot go sideways, because social isolation, as we stated, it can be beneficial for people to be away from toxicity. It can be something as easy to talk to your loved one and cope up from it. It can be something as easy in a daily life, and if we do not need any urgency, it as dangerous and as grand as an epidemic. And for all these very reasons, we come to a conclusion that this motion must fall. Thank you.
Thank you, Aryendra. Ishan, it's over to you.
Thank you, guys. I hope you had a good time. I know an online round can be a bit boring at times, a bit tiring. So our closing ceremony will be started by 3:30 or 4. We'll let you know. So, see you there.
Can you repeat?
And also at Mahabes.
Definitely.
I hope everyone is coming. I would love
Can you repeat
all
the
of you to
time
see
of
that.
closing ceremony?
Sorry.
Closing ceremony. Can you repeat the time of closing ceremony?
Around 3:30.
3:30. Okay.
We'll text in the group. Okay.